The night was supposed to be dazzling. The mansion in Los Angeles shone like a palace, with crystal chandeliers reflecting on the rippling water of a massive pool. Guests in glittering gowns and tuxedos held champagne flutes, whispering gossip behind painted smiles. They thought they were here to celebrate power, wealth, and love. But what unfolded that night would scar every witness forever. At the center of it all stood Ava Morgan. Once her name had filled arenas. Once her voice had been played on every radio station in America. But tonight, she wasn't introduced as the star she used to be. No, tonight she was paraded as nothing more than the devoted wife of David Miller. The baby in her swollen belly was supposed to symbolize their perfect marriage. Only Ava knew the truth. It was all a lie. David, her husband, stood proudly at the edge of the pool. His designer suit shimmered under the lights. Beside him, like a shadow in silk, was Sophia Lee. Everyone whispered about her, but no one dared speak the word Mistress aloud. They clapped politely as David raised his glass, smiling with the confidence of a man who thought he controlled the world. Then his voice rang out, sharp as glass. "Tonight, my wife will do something no one has ever dared. She will give birth underwater, surrounded by luxury, to prove that our family is powerful, natural, and unstoppable." The crowd gasped. Some laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. Ava's knees trembled. She grabbed her belly instinctively, her heart racing. The coldness of his words struck deeper than any knife. She whispered, "David, please, not this, not tonight." But her plea was drowned in the wave of murmurs rising from the crowd. Sophia stepped closer, her perfume sickly sweet, her smile sharper than poison. "Don't worry, Ava," she cooed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This will be beautiful. You'll show the world what true strength looks like." But Ava's body knew the danger. She was 8 months along. The doctor had warned her to avoid stress, to rest, and here she was, forced under glaring lights, eyes of strangers piercing her like knives. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. Yet David's hand gripped her shoulder like iron. The music stopped. All that remained was the sound of water lapping gently against the pool's edge. David motioned to the staff. Towels, cameras, lights, all prepared. Every detail planned, except for the most important, her safety. Ava's lips trembled, her voice barely audible. She whispered to herself, "If I go in that water, I may never come out." The crowd leaned forward, hungry for spectacle. Cameras flashed, champagne glasses froze midair. Every eye was locked on her fragile figure standing by the pool. Ava felt the cold breeze sweep across her skin, raising goosebumps. Her pulse raced, her baby kicked, as if sensing danger. She looked at David, his face calm, almost cruel. She looked at Sophia, smirking like a queen who had already won. And then, David gave the signal. The staff began to guide Ava toward the freezing pool. And in that moment, she realized this was not a celebration. It was a public execution disguised as a show. Before Ava Morgan became the trembling figure standing at the edge of that pool, she had been a legend. Years earlier, she was the golden voice of America. A young woman with fire in her soul and a smile that lit up every stage she stepped on. Her concerts sold out within hours. Fans screamed her name in stadiums. Music awards lined her shelves. She was more than a singer. She was a symbol of hope, a woman whose song spoke of love, pain, and dreams. But success came at a price. Endless tours, sleepless nights, the crushing pressure of fame. Ava carried it all until one fateful night when her heart gave out on stage. The collapse was splashed across every headline. Superstar Ava Morgan faints during concert. Doctors warned her to rest, to take time off, or she might lose her life. For the first time, Ava stepped away from the spotlight. The world wondered where she had gone. Some claimed she was in rehab. Others whispered she had lost her voice. The truth was far more simple and tragic. That was when David Miller appeared. He was charming, handsome, and painted himself as a savior. He promised her peace, family, and a life away from the suffocating cameras. To a woman exhausted and vulnerable, his words felt like a warm blanket. Against her manager's warnings, against her instincts, Ava said yes to his proposal. In the beginning, David kept his promises. He bought her a house, whispered sweet words, and spoke of the future they would build together. Ava, desperate to believe in love, thought she had finally found her refuge. She gave up her career, stopped singing, and devoted herself to being the perfect wife. But the fairy tale unraveled quickly. David's gentle mask slipped. He became controlling, jealous of her past fame, angry whenever fans recognized her in public. He accused her of clinging to the spotlight even when she hid from it. Slowly, he chipped away at her confidence until she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Then came Sophia Lee. Young, ambitious, and ruthless, Sophia entered their lives under the guise of a family friend. Ava tried to welcome her, but soon saw the way David's eyes followed Sophia, the late-night phone calls, the sudden business trips. Ava's heart broke silently as the betrayal grew obvious, but she stayed for the baby. Pregnant and vulnerable, Ava told herself she had to endure. She sang lullabies to her unborn child in secret, clutching her belly with tears streaming down her face. She prayed the child would bring peace back into the household, that David would soften. Instead, his cruelty only deepened. Behind closed doors, he called her weak. He mocked her for gaining weight. Sophia, always with a smirk, whispered, "You used to be someone. Now you're nothing." Ava swallowed her pain, forcing a smile in public, hiding her bruised spirit. The world that once adored her no longer knew her name. She was forgotten, erased, until that night by the pool, when her private nightmare was thrust into the spotlight once more. And as the cold water rippled before her, Ava realized the world would soon remember her again, but not for her music, for her suffering. David Miller was the kind of man who knew how to play a role. To outsiders, he was dazzling, handsome in a tailored suit, confident in every step, and quick with a charming smile that could disarm even the sharpest critic. He spoke of ambition, of creating an empire, of providing his wife with a life fit for royalty. People believed him. They always did. But behind the polished surface was a man consumed by greed. David's life had always been about climbing, about taking, about using anyone necessary to secure his place at the top. He wasn't born into wealth. He clawed his way into it. Every relationship, every partnership, every smile he offered had a price. Ava wasn't the love of his life. She was the perfect trophy. When he married Ava Morgan, David saw not a wife, but a brand. The world knew her as a star. Her face opened doors he could never dream of touching. Her silence, her retirement, her retreat from fame, those were his victories. He had tamed the golden voice of America and locked it away in a cage. That was his power. In public, he paraded Ava like a prized possession, hand on her back, smile on his lips. Behind closed doors, he was ruthless. If she complained, he silenced her with cold words. If she questioned him, he reminded her that without him, she was nothing but a washed-up singer. Each jab cut deeper, until Ava's spirit grew quieter, her once bright eyes dimming. The pregnancy only emboldened him. To David, Ava's child was another tool. He planned photo shoots, interviews, and lavish events, all centered around the idea of a perfect family. He spoke about legacy, not love. He saw the baby as a marketing strategy, another way to polish his brand and elevate his status among the elite. And then came Sophia Lee. Where Ava was gentle, Sophia was sharp. Where Ava sacrificed, Sophia demanded. David adored that ruthlessness. In Sophia, he saw a reflection of his own hunger. She encouraged his schemes, whispered ideas of grandeur, and laughed at Ava's pain. Together, they crafted the cruel spectacle of the underwater birth. It wasn't about health. It wasn't about beauty. It was about control. David's plan was simple. Ava would deliver in front of powerful investors and media, proving she was the perfect, obedient wife. The story would spread worldwide. David Miller, the visionary husband, and his flawless family. Any sign of Ava's weakness would be buried under his carefully orchestrated image. He rehearsed the speech, planned the lighting, even chose the champagne brand for the toast. Every detail was precise, because David believed perfection was the only way to keep his empire intact. The only problem was Ava herself. She wasn't breaking fast enough. She wasn't quiet enough. Somewhere inside her, the old Ava still breathed, and David couldn't allow that. That night, as he stood by the pool, David wasn't thinking about his wife or his unborn child. He was thinking about cameras, headlines, power. Ava was no longer a woman in his eyes. She was a stage prop. And as he gave the signal for her to step into the freezing water, David never realized that the show he designed would soon become his greatest humiliation. If David was the mask of charm, then Sophia Lee was the poison hidden beneath silk. On the surface, she was dazzling. Her long dark hair spilled like waves over her shoulders, her lips painted in a perfect smile. She wore gowns that hugged her figure, jewels that sparkled with every flicker of light, and a perfume that lingered long after she passed by. To strangers, Sophia was a vision. To Ava, she was a shadow that stole the air from every room. Sophia played her role masterfully. In front of guests, she spoke sweetly about Ava. "She's so strong," she would say, patting Ava's arm as though they were sisters. "David is lucky to have such a devoted wife." Her tone dripped with honey, but her eyes always glimmered with malice. The crowd would nod approvingly, convinced Sophia was simply a loyal friend of the family. But when the doors closed and the cameras were gone, the mask slipped. Sophia's words turned into knives. She whispered them when no one else could hear, close to Ava's ear, sharp enough to leave scars no one could see. "Do you even remember what it felt like to matter? The world doesn't sing your songs anymore. You're just David's tired little wife." Ava endured in silence. She tried to shield her unborn child from the venom, humming lullabies to drown out Sophia's laughter. Yet the venom seeped deeper each day. Sophia didn't just want David, she wanted Ava erased. The truth was, Sophia had been calculating since the day she met David. She saw in him not just a lover, but a ticket to the power she craved. Her beauty could open doors, but with David's wealth and Ava's downfall, she could rule entire rooms. Together, she and David were a storm. And Ava? She was nothing more than a stepping stone. Sophia pushed David toward grander and crueler displays. It was her idea to make Ava's childbirth into a spectacle. "Think about it," she purred into David's ear. "No one else in your circle would dare. They'll all envy you. They'll all bow to you." David's ego swelled under her encouragement, and the underwater birth was set in motion. On the night of the party, Sophia played her part flawlessly. She floated through the crowd like a queen, her hand brushing David's arm whenever Ava wasn't looking. She whispered little jokes into his ear, her laughter tinkling like wind chimes. Guests noticed, but no one dared question. After all, Ava's silence was taken as acceptance. When Ava's face turned pale at the announcement of the underwater birth, Sophia stepped in with her practiced sweetness. She placed a hand over Ava's trembling ones and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't be afraid, darling. You'll be magnificent. Everyone will admire you." To the crowd, she was comforting. To Ava, the words were a blade twisted deeper. And when David gave the signal, it was Sophia who leaned closer, her lips brushing Ava's ear, and whispered the words that made Ava's blood run cold. "Don't fail, Ava, because if you do, you won't just lose your baby, you'll lose everything." The mansion's ballroom shimmered with gold, silver, and glass. It was the kind of place where power gathered, where men in expensive suits talked about deals worth millions, and women compared diamonds the size of raindrops. Laughter echoed against the marble walls. Music swelled from the string quartet, and champagne flowed as if the world had no end to its riches. For most of the guests, it was just another night of indulgence. For Ava Morgan, it was a cage built to humiliate her. Everywhere she turned, eyes followed. Once, those eyes had belonged to fans who adored her. Tonight, they belonged to strangers, curious and cold, waiting to see what kind of spectacle her husband would create. Ava could feel their stares cutting into her skin, dissecting her like a rare specimen. Her hands trembled against her swollen belly. The baby kicked, as though warning her of the storm about to break. David thrived in the attention. Standing tall near the grand pool that glittered under the chandelier lights, he lifted his champagne glass and spoke with the confidence of a king. "Tonight," he declared, "my wife will bring life into this world in a way no one has ever seen. A symbol of purity, of strength, of our legacy." The crowd erupted in applause, though some gasps betrayed shock. Ava's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to beg someone, anyone, to stop this madness. But her voice was locked inside her chest. She could already hear David's cruel whisper, "Smile. Do as I say. Don't embarrass me." Sophia floated through the crowd like a glittering phantom. Every step she took was calculated, every glance at Ava filled with mockery. She wrapped her arm around David's and laughed, her voice carrying above the music. To the guests, she was the picture of charm. To Ava, she was the knife twisting deeper. The staff moved quickly, setting the stage. White towels folded neatly, crystal lights adjusted to shine on the pool. Cameras discreetly positioned to capture every moment. It was no longer a party, it was a show. and Ava was the unwilling performer. A hush fell over the guests as Ava was guided toward the pool's edge. The lights reflected off the water, casting ghostly ripples on her pale face. She gripped her belly tightly, whispering under her breath, "Please, not like this." No one answered. The silence was suffocating. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Is this safe?" Another whispered, "It's cruel." But no one dared raise their voice. No one dared defy David Miller. Power and fear kept their lips sealed. The music stopped completely now. All that could be heard was the faint sound of the water moving in the pool and Ava's shallow breaths. David smiled at the crowd, oblivious to the terror in his wife's eyes. "Tonight," he said again, "history will be made." Ava's knees weakened. Her body screamed to run, yet her feet stayed rooted. The cold air brushed against her skin, and the pool's surface seemed to widen into a black void waiting to swallow her whole. She felt utterly alone, abandoned in front of hundreds of watching eyes. And then, as the first staff member reached out to help her step down into the freezing water, Ava saw it. Blood rushing from her nose, dripping onto her trembling hands. The crowd gasped as the first crimson drops fell into the pool, staining the water before Ava had even touched it. The first drop of blood silenced the ballroom. For a brief, frozen second, no one moved. The crimson stain spread across Ava's trembling hands, gleaming under the lights like a warning. Her body swayed, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. But instead of concern, David's face hardened. "Stand straight," he hissed through clenched teeth, his smile still plastered for the cameras. "Don't ruin this moment." Ava's legs quivered. She tried to steady herself, but her vision blurred. Heat burned her face, then drained away into chilling weakness. The crowd whispered louder now, their curiosity mixing with unease. "Is she okay?" "She doesn't look well." Yet no one stepped forward. No one dared. Sophia was the first to break the silence. She let out a light laugh, her hand covering her mouth as though embarrassed on Ava's behalf. "Don't be nervous, darling," she said loudly, her sweet voice dripping with venom. "Every woman bleeds a little when she's about to give birth. It's natural." Her words cut through the crowd, framing Ava's suffering as weakness, as if she were failing at her one purpose. Ava's lips trembled. She wanted to shout the truth, that she was in pain, that she was scared, that she didn't want this. But the weight of 100 eyes crushed her voice. Her body doubled over with a sudden contraction, a surge of agony that shot through her like fire. The guests gasped, stepping back instinctively as if her pain might be contagious. David seized her arm roughly, forcing her upright. His smile never faltered, but his grip was iron. "You will not embarrass me," he muttered under his breath. "Do you understand?" Tears welled in Ava's eyes. She looked out into the sea of strangers, silently begging for help. But all she saw were curious stares, phones raised, cameras flashing. Not one hand reached for her. Not one voice stood up against David. Her knees buckled again, and this time she collapsed against the marble tiles, the sound echoing through the grand hall. Her dress pooled around her, stained with drops of blood. A few gasps rose, but no one moved closer. David crouched beside her, still smiling at the crowd. "She's fine," he assured them, his tone firm. "Just nerves. She'll be fine." But Ava knew she wasn't fine. Her body shook violently as another contraction ripped through her. She clutched her belly, her fingernails digging into her own skin. Fear consumed her. Fear not just for herself, but for the fragile life inside her. Sophia leaned down, her face inches from Ava's. Her eyes sparkled with triumph as she whispered, "Look at you, the world's forgotten star, crawling on the floor like a broken doll. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe you don't deserve to shine anymore." Those words pierced Ava deeper than the pain tearing through her body. She wanted to rise, to fight, to scream. But her strength failed. Darkness crowded the edges of her vision as she gasped for air, her body collapsing fully against the cold marble. And as Ava's head struck the floor, the crowd erupted into chaos, yet still no one rushed to save her. The chaos in the ballroom was deafening. Guests murmured, some shouted, but still, no one dared to step between David and his collapsing wife. Ava lay trembling on the cold marble floor, her body slick with sweat, her gown stained with blood. She clutched her belly desperately, gasping for breath as another contraction tore through her fragile frame. David crouched down beside her, his perfect smile stiff. To the cameras, he looked like a devoted husband trying to soothe his wife. But his words, whispered into her ear, were as merciless as steel. "Get up, Ava. You're not going to ruin this for me. You will go into that water. Now." Ava shook her head weakly. "Please, I can't. The baby." He tightened his grip on her arm, yanking her upward with frightening force. Her scream echoed through the hall, but David didn't flinch. His eyes were cold, his jaw tight. To him, Ava was no longer a woman carrying his child. She was a tool, a prop for his performance. Sophia appeared at his side, her expression glowing with false concern. "Oh, poor Ava," she said loudly as though speaking to the guests. "She's just overwhelmed, but David, she can do this. You've prepared everything so perfectly." Her voice was sugar, but her eyes gleamed with victory. With brutal efficiency, David signaled to the staff. Two men in black suits stepped forward. They didn't look at Ava's face, they didn't ask questions, they simply obeyed. Each grabbed one of her arms and dragged her toward the shimmering pool. The crowd gasped, some covering their mouths in horror, others raising phones to capture every moment. Ava's bare feet scraped against the marble, leaving streaks of blood behind her. She thrashed weakly, begging, "No, please, I'm not ready, I'll die." But her cries were drowned in the buzz of whispers and the snapping of camera flashes. The pool glistened under the chandeliers, its surface calm, waiting. The men lifted Ava and lowered her into the freezing water. Her body convulsed instantly at the icy shock. Her breath ripped from her lungs. The water closed around her like a coffin. The cold pierced her skin, stabbing her muscles, stealing the last of her strength. Her gown floated around her like a ghostly shroud, the blood from her body blooming into the pool like crimson smoke. She struggled to keep her head above water, but another contraction ripped through her, forcing a scream that only sent more water rushing into her mouth. She coughed, choked, thrashed. Her arms flailed toward the crowd, but no one moved. No one reached for her. Some watched with horrified fascination, others with morbid delight. David stood tall at the pool's edge, his smile tight but unbroken, as though he were hosting a flawless show. Sophia leaned against him, whispering something that made him smirk. Ava's vision blurred. She could see the chandelier lights fracturing on the water's surface. She could hear her baby's faint heartbeat inside her own, fragile and desperate. With the last of her breath, she prayed, not for herself, but for the child she carried. Her body weakened. Her limbs felt heavy, her chest burning. Darkness closed in around her. She sank lower, her hands reaching up through the water, bubbles escaping her lips in a final silent cry for help. And just as Ava's body slipped beneath the surface, a shadow dove into the pool, cutting through the water like salvation. The water closed over Ava's head, swallowing her in icy silence. Her limbs were heavy, her chest seared as if fire and frost collided inside her. The last image in her fading vision was the shimmering chandelier above, breaking into fragments of light as she sank deeper into the pool. Her baby's faint kick inside her belly felt like a desperate plea. She thought it was the end. Then suddenly, the surface exploded. A tall figure dove into the pool, cutting through the freezing water with powerful strokes. Strong arms wrapped around Ava's trembling body, pulling her up toward the air. Ava's lungs screamed, her mouth opened, and she coughed violently as her head broke through the surface. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Phones flashed like lightning. Guests pushed forward to see who had dared to interrupt David Miller's spectacle. And then they saw him. Michael Anderson. Michael was no ordinary man in their world of luxury. He wasn't just wealthy, he was legendary. A billionaire who built his empire with steel determination and sharp vision. Rumors always followed him. The ruthless dealmaker, the untouchable tycoon, the man no one could outshine. And yet, in this moment, he wasn't a business titan. He was a savior. Lifting Ava into his arms, dripping wet and shivering, Michael carried her to the edge of the pool. Water streamed from her gown, streaked with blood. Her head lolled weakly against his chest, her lips pale, her breaths shallow. For the first time that evening, silence truly fell over the room. David's face twisted. The mask of charm cracked into raw rage. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice sharp, trembling with fury. Michael's dark eyes locked onto him with a glare that could cut steel. His voice was calm but thunderous. "I'm saving her life. Something you clearly don't care about." The words sliced through the air, igniting murmurs among the guests. Some nodded in agreement, emboldened by Michael's defiance. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to take sides but unable to ignore the truth. Sophia, rattled but quick to recover, stepped forward with her saccharine smile. "Michael, this isn't necessary. Ava is just overwhelmed. David was only trying to." Michael silenced her with a look so piercing that she faltered mid-sentence. He turned his attention back to Ava, his hand gently brushing damp hair from her face. "You're safe now," he whispered, though his voice was meant only for her. Ava's eyelids fluttered. She caught a glimpse of his face, the strong jaw, the furrowed brow, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. Something deep inside her stirred, a flicker of recognition. She remembered his face from years ago, in the crowd at her concerts, always watching, always present. But before she could grasp the memory, another wave of pain ripped through her body. She cried out, clutching her belly as blood continued to seep. Michael's expression darkened. He lifted his head and barked to the stunned crowd, "Call an ambulance, now!" No one moved at first, paralyzed by the shock of defying David Miller. But Michael's authority was undeniable. Within seconds, someone dialed 911. Others rushed for towels and blankets. For the first time that night, Ava felt the weight of compassion return to the room. But David wasn't finished. His pride was shredded, his plan ruined. Stepping closer, his voice lowered to a dangerous growl. "She's still my wife. You have no right to touch her." And as David reached for Ava, Michael rose to his full height, ready to face him head-on, the room bracing for an inevitable clash. Michael Anderson rose from the poolside, water dripping from his suit, Ava trembling in his arms. He stood tall, his presence commanding, his glare fixed on David Miller. For a moment, the lavish ballroom felt like a battlefield. Guests froze, unsure whether they were about to witness a rescue or a war. David stepped forward, his smile gone, his mask shattered. Fury twisted his handsome features into something monstrous. "She's my wife," he spat, pointing at Ava as though she were property. "You have no right to interfere." Michael didn't flinch. His voice was steady, resonant, carrying across the stunned crowd. "A husband protects his wife. He doesn't drag her bleeding into a freezing pool to show off like a circus act. You forfeited every right the moment you treated her like an object." The room gasped. No one had ever spoken to David Miller like this. Not in public, not in front of his circle of power. Even Sophia's perfect smile faltered. She reached for David's arm, whispering, "Calm down, they're all watching." But David's pride was wounded beyond repair. His empire had been built on control, on intimidation, and now Michael was dismantling it with words sharp as blades. "You think you can embarrass me in my own house?" David snarled. "Do you know who I am?" Michael took one step closer, his frame towering, his aura radiating unshakable power. "Yes," he said evenly. "You're the man who almost killed his own wife for applause." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some guests lowered their eyes, ashamed for having clapped earlier. Others pulled out their phones, recording the scene, sensing the scandal that would soon flood headlines. For the first time, David realized he was losing the audience. His reputation, his image, his carefully built illusion, it was crumbling. Ava stirred weakly in Michael's arms, her lips parting. "Please, stop," she whispered. But her plea only fueled David's rage. "Don't you dare side with him," he snapped at her. "You're mine, Ava. You will always be mine." Michael's eyes darkened. His voice dropped to a growl. "No, she doesn't belong to you. She belongs to herself, and she deserves better than this." That was the moment the shift happened. Gasps and nods rippled through the guests. For years, many had whispered doubts about David, but none dared speak. Now, with Michael standing as living proof of courage, they saw the truth laid bare. Sophia's mask cracked too. She clutched David's arm tighter, her eyes darting nervously. If David fell tonight, her glittering dream collapsed with him. "David," she hissed under her breath, "control yourself." But David had lost control entirely. His face burned red, veins bulging in his neck. He lunged forward, grabbing for Ava, his hand clawing at her wrist. Michael pivoted swiftly, shifting Ava to one arm while blocking David's advance with the other. The force of their collision echoed across the marble. Glasses shattering on nearby tables as startled guests leapt back. For a second, the two men locked eyes. David's blazing with desperation, Michael's burning with unshakable resolve. And in that tense silence, before anyone could breathe, David drew back his fist, ready to strike, not realizing the cameras were capturing every second of his downfall. The ballroom froze as David Miller's fist hung in the air, trembling with rage. Guests gasped, hands covering mouths, phones raised higher to capture every second. The polished image David had spent years building shattered in an instant, revealing the raw violence beneath. Michael Anderson shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. In one swift movement, he caught David's wrist before the blow could land. The clash of strength reverberated through the silence, the two men locked in a struggle that felt bigger than themselves. Ava, weak and trembling in Michael's arms, whimpered, "Please, stop." Her words barely reached above the pounding of her own heartbeat. But David didn't hear her. His world had narrowed to his bruised ego. "She's mine," he roared, spit flying from his lips. His voice cracked with desperation, not love, but ownership. "You can't take her from me." Michael's eyes blazed with fury. "You already lost her the moment you chose pride over her life." His words rang like a verdict, and the crowd erupted into whispers. Some guests shook their heads in disgust. Others muttered, "Monster," under their breath. For years, they had turned a blind eye to rumors, but now the truth was undeniable. Sophia, realizing disaster was unfolding, stepped forward with her trademark smile, but even her voice wavered. "Everyone, please," she said, raising her hands. "This is just a misunderstanding. David is under stress, that's all. You mustn't." Her words were drowned out by the sound of Ava coughing violently. Blood trickled from her lips, her body convulsing. The sight silenced the room more effectively than any speech. The horror on the guests' faces grew as Ava's condition worsened before their eyes. Michael's protective instinct surged. He tightened his hold on Ava and turned toward the exit. "She needs a hospital. Now." His voice was thunder, a command impossible to ignore. Several guests scrambled into action, finally breaking free fear. Someone called 911. Others cleared a path. But David wasn't done. He lunged again, his eyes wild, his voice breaking with fury. "Don't you dare walk out with her. She stays here. She stays with me." Michael spun around, his glare like fire. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The billionaire protector facing the husband turned tyrant. Then Michael spoke, his voice low, dangerous, final. "Touch her again, and I'll end you." The crowd erupted, phones flashing, whispers turning into shouts. "Call security," someone yelled. "Get him away from her." The tide had turned. Where once David commanded respect, now he inspired fear and disgust. Sophia backed away, her face pale. For the first time, her perfect mask cracked. She realized the man she clung to was sinking, and she would drown with him if she didn't let go. David, blind to it all, thrashed against Michael's grip. His suit jacket tore, his hair disheveled, his once flawless image reduced to a raving spectacle. "She's my wife," he screamed again, but the words no longer carried authority. They sounded pathetic, hollow, desperate. And as the wail of sirens grew faintly outside, flashing red and blue lights reflecting against the tall windows of the mansion, everyone knew this night would mark the beginning of David Miller's ruin. Because just as the paramedics burst through the doors, David broke free and lunged one last time. This time not at Michael, but directly at Ava. The heavy doors of the mansion burst open, and a team of paramedics rushed inside, their red jackets a stark contrast to the glittering gowns and black tuxedos. The sound of sirens still echoed faintly outside, a warning that reality had invaded the illusion of luxury. Guests stepped back, parting like waves as the medics pushed forward with a stretcher, medical bags swinging at their sides. Ava lay limp in Michael Anderson's arms, her skin pale, lips trembling, breath shallow. Blood stained her gown, streaking the fabric like a cruel reminder of her suffering. The medics dropped to their knees beside her, opening equipment with quick precision. "We need her on the stretcher now," one barked, already preparing an oxygen mask. Michael knelt down carefully, laying Ava onto the waiting stretcher. His hand lingered on hers, refusing to let go, even as the medics began working. His jaw clenched as he watched them strap her down, his eyes fierce, silently daring anyone to interfere. But David wasn't finished. The sight of his wife being taken away, the whispers of disgust from the crowd, the flashing phones recording every second, his world was unraveling. His pride, his empire, his control, it was slipping through his fingers. And in his twisted mind, if he couldn't control Ava, no one would. "Stop," David shouted, shoving past guests, His hair was disheveled, his face red with rage, his voice cracking with desperation. "You can't take her. She's mine. She belongs here with me." One of the medics stepped forward to block him. "Sir, you need to step back. She's critical." But David snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Get out of my way." With sudden violence, he shoved the medic aside, sending the man stumbling into a table. Glass shattered, champagne spilling across the marble floor. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Michael rose instantly, stepping between David and Ava, his fists clenched, his voice sharp as a blade. "Touch her again, and I swear you'll regret it." David's eyes burned, wild with obsession. He didn't care about the cameras, the witnesses, the paramedics. He only saw Ava slipping away from him, carried into another man's world. In a sudden, reckless surge, he lunged forward, his hands clawing toward her stretcher. The medics shouted, trying to pull him back. Guests screamed, phones tumbled to the ground. Ava, barely conscious, opened her eyes for a fleeting second, terror flashing across her pale face. Her lips moved weakly, forming one word: "No." Michael caught David mid-lunge, their bodies colliding with a sickening thud. The billionaire's strength overpowered the husband's fury, but David thrashed like a madman, spitting curses, clawing at Michael's shoulders. The medics struggled to wheel Ava away, their voices urgent. "She's crashing." "We need to move now." David's screams echoed through the grand hall. "She's mine. Do you hear me? Mine." His words were ragged, pathetic, yet terrifying in their desperation. And then, before anyone could stop him, David's hand shot toward the stretcher, his fingers inches from Ava's arm. But just as his hand reached her, the sound of police officers storming into the ballroom froze him in place, their commands cutting through the chaos like thunder. "Hands in the air! Step back now!" The commanding shout cut through the chaos like lightning. Uniformed police officers rushed into the ballroom, their weapons drawn, their presence undeniable. The flashing red and blue lights from the squad cars outside spilled through the tall glass windows, painting the golden walls with the colors of justice. David froze mid-lunge, his hand just inches from Ava's stretcher. His chest heaved, his eyes wild, but for the first time that night, fear flickered across his face. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, erupted in whispers. Phones tilted higher, recording every detail of the once untouchable David Miller being cornered in his own mansion. "Step away from her," one officer barked, advancing quickly. Two others moved to flank Michael and the stretcher, creating a shield between David and Ava. The medics continued their urgent work, securing Ava's oxygen mask and rushing her toward the exit. David's voice broke into a scream. "You can't take her. She's my wife. She belongs to me." His desperation echoed through the hall, but the words no longer carried the weight of authority. They were hollow, pathetic, the ravings of a man undone. Michael stood tall, his broad frame blocking David's path. His voice was cold steel. "You don't own her. You never did." The officers closed in, their commands sharp. "On the ground, now!" But David resisted. He shoved one officer, his hands flailing, his pride clinging to the last threads of control. Guests gasped, some crying out in fear, others shaking their heads in disgust. Sophia, standing frozen by the pool, covered her mouth with trembling hands, her mask of calm finally shattered. It took 3 officers to pin David down. He thrashed violently, his voice breaking into guttural roars. "You'll regret this. All of you. I'm David Miller. Do you know who I am?" The officers wrestled his arms behind his back, the metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut louder than the string quartet had played all evening. The sound silenced the room. For years, David had walked untouchable, his power shielding him from consequences. Now, in front of everyone, he was nothing more than a man restrained on his own marble floor. The guests began to whisper louder, emboldened by his downfall. "I always knew he was cruel. Did you see how he treated her? It's over for him." The tide had turned. What was once admiration was now contempt. Sophia took a hesitant step back, her eyes darting toward the doors as if calculating how fast she could disappear. For the first time, she saw David for what he was, not a ticket to power, but an anchor pulling her down. The medics wheeled Ava out swiftly, Michael striding beside her, his hand never leaving hers. Her pale face twitched with pain, her breath shallow but steady under the oxygen mask. She was slipping in and out of consciousness, her body fighting desperately to hold on. David's screams echoed after her as he was dragged to his knees, his once flawless suit torn, his hair plastered to his sweaty forehead. "Ava, don't leave me. You'll regret this." And as the police hauled him upright, David's furious eyes locked on Michael, his lips curling into a promise. This isn't the end. The ambulance tore through the streets of Los Angeles, its sirens wailing like a cry of urgency against the night. Inside, Ava Morgan lay strapped to the stretcher, her body shaking uncontrollably, her lips pale, her breath ragged. The oxygen mask covered half her face, fogging with every desperate inhale. Blood continued to seep, soaking the sheets beneath her. The paramedics worked swiftly, their voices sharp and urgent. "She's losing too much blood," one shouted, adjusting an IV. Another checked her vitals, his brow furrowing. "BP dropping fast, we need to stabilize her now." Beside her, Michael Anderson sat rigid, his large hand gripping hers with unyielding strength. His expensive suit was still soaked from the pool, his hair wet, but he didn't care. His entire world had narrowed to the fragile woman lying before him. He leaned closer, his voice breaking through the chaos. "Stay with me, Ava. Please, you're stronger than this." Ava's eyelids fluttered, her vision blurred, but she recognized his voice. In her fading consciousness, she saw fragments of her life, bright lights on stage, the roar of fans, the sweetness of her first love, the cruelty of betrayal. And now here, the warmth of a man who held her not as a trophy, but as something precious. Her lips moved faintly under the mask. "The baby, please, save the baby." Michael's chest tightened, his throat aching with emotion. He squeezed her hand tighter. "We'll save you both. I promise." The ambulance jolted to a stop at the hospital. Doors flung open, and the stretcher was wheeled out with urgency. Michael followed, his powerful frame striding beside the gurney, refusing to be left behind. Cameras flashed outside the hospital. Reporters had already caught wind of the scandal. Questions were shouted, but Michael's glare silenced them as security pushed the crowd back. Inside the emergency room, doctors swarmed Ava. "She's hemorrhaging. Prep for surgery," one barked. Another nurse rushed forward with blood bags. The sound of machines, the beeping monitors, and the frantic calls filled the sterile white room. Michael stood at the edge of the chaos, his fists clenched, helpless for the first time in years. He was a man used to control, to bending the world to his will. But here, he could only watch as Ava's life hung in the balance. A doctor turned to him briefly. "Sir, we need to operate immediately. She might not make it, and the baby." He hesitated, his voice heavy. "It's too early to tell." The words struck Michael like a hammer. His heart sank, but his face hardened with resolve. He stepped closer to Ava, bending down to whisper in her ear. "Fight, Ava. Fight for yourself. Fight for your child. You've already survived the cruelty of this world. Don't let it take you now." Her hand twitched weakly in his. A tear slipped down her cheek. Then the monitors screamed, a piercing alarm. Ava's body convulsed, her pulse crashing. Doctors shouted, nurses scrambled, paddles were prepared. Michael was pulled back by a nurse. "We need space," she ordered. He watched, his heart pounding, his breath shallow, as Ava's body jolted under the electric shock. And just as the monitor flatlined, the doctor shouted, "We're losing her." The emergency room doors slammed shut, leaving Michael Anderson staring through the narrow glass window. His reflection glared back at him, soaked suit, clenched jaw, eyes blazing with fear. For the first time in his life, money, power, and influence meant nothing. The woman he had just pulled from death was slipping away again, this time into the sterile silence of an operating room. Inside, doctors moved with frantic precision. "BP is crashing. Start transfusion now," one shouted. A nurse pressed blood bags into place, another adjusted oxygen flow. The lead surgeon, sweat beading on his forehead, barked orders with the sharpness of a commander at war. "We need to stop the bleeding or we lose her." Ava's body lay pale and still under the harsh lights. Tubes ran from her arms, monitors beeped wildly, and her chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. Her once bright eyes were closed, her lashes damp with tears shed before she lost consciousness. The surgeon's gloved hands moved quickly. "She's hemorrhaging badly. Clamp here. No tighter." The assistant followed, hands trembling under the pressure. "Heart rate's dropping again." A nurse shouted. "Prepare the paddles," the surgeon ordered. Ava's body jolted violently as electricity surged through her chest. The monitor screamed, then steadied briefly, only to falter again. "She's not stabilizing," the anesthesiologist cried. Michael paced outside, his hand pressed against the glass. Every second felt like an eternity. He was a man who could sign a contract and change the fate of corporations, but here he could do nothing but watch. He muttered under his breath like a prayer. "Hold on, Ava. You're stronger than this. Don't let go." Inside the room, Ava drifted between shadows and light. In her unconscious mind, she stood on a stage once more, the roar of fans echoing around her. But instead of joy, there was silence. The spotlight dimmed. A door opened in the distance, beckoning her forward. A voice whispered, sweet and cold, "It's easier if you stop fighting." But then another voice broke through. The memory of Michael's words, steady and warm. "Fight, Ava. Fight for yourself. Fight for your child." She clutched her belly in the vision, feeling the faint kick of her unborn baby, fragile yet alive. With a surge of will, she turned away from the darkness. Her body responded. The monitor beeped stronger for a moment. "We've got rhythm," a nurse cried. The room exhaled in relief, but the surgeon didn't relax. "She's not out of danger yet. Prepare for C-section. We need to try to save the baby too." The words struck the room like thunder. Nurses scrambled, instruments clattering onto trays. The air thickened with urgency. 2 lives now balanced on the knife's edge. Michael, overhearing fragments from outside, felt his chest tighten. He pressed his forehead against the glass, whispering fiercely, "Save them both. Please save them both." Inside, the surgeon looked at his team. "This is it. If we can't stop the bleeding now, we'll lose them." Scalpels glinted under the lights. The clock ticked mercilessly. Ava's pulse wavered on the monitor, the line trembling dangerously close to flat. And just as the surgeon made the first incision, the monitor let out a long, chilling tone that sent a shiver through the entire room. The piercing flatline filled the operating room, freezing everyone in place. For one terrible moment, all that could be heard was the shrill alarm echoing against sterile walls. "She's coding," a nurse shouted. The surgeon's face hardened. "Paddles, now!" Ava's body convulsed as another electric shock jolted her chest. The monitor flickered, then steadied into a fragile rhythm. The team exhaled with relief, but there was no time to rest. Blood continued to pour, her life draining away. "Prepare for C-section," the surgeon barked. "If we can save the baby, we move now." Scalpels sliced under the blinding lights. The air was thick with urgency, voices overlapping, machines beeping. A nurse murmured, "She's fading fast." Another whispered, "Come on, baby, hold on." Minutes felt like hours. Finally, a faint cry pierced the chaos. Or was it a whimper? The nurse lifted the tiny, fragile form, her face grave. She moved quickly to the side station, rubbing the baby's chest, checking for breath. The room held its breath with her. But the cry didn't come. The nurse's voice cracked. "No pulse. I'm starting compressions." Her gloved fingers pressed gently on the tiny chest, over and over, while another nurse worked the oxygen pump. The sound of their desperate efforts filled the room, accompanied only by the flat rhythm of silence. "Come on, little one," someone whispered. "Come on." The surgeon glanced at the clock, his jaw tight. 2 minutes. "Keep going." Michael stood outside the glass, straining to see, his heart hammering. He couldn't hear everything, but he knew. He saw the frantic movements, the nurse shaking her head, the surgeon's lips tightening. His fists pressed against the window as he whispered, "No, no." Inside, the nurse's voice broke after another round of compressions. Still no response. The surgeon hesitated, then gave the quiet order no one wanted to hear. "Call it." The room fell into heavy silence. The clock marked the exact time. The tiny body lay motionless on the table, wrapped gently in a white cloth. One nurse bit her lip, tears streaming down her face as she carried the child over to a bassinet, placing a small blanket over it. The surgeon's voice cracked just slightly as he turned back to his team. "Focus on saving the mother. We can't lose her too." Michael's chest caved as he saw the nurse cover the lifeless form. He pressed his hand harder against the glass, his face etched with grief. He wasn't the father, but in that moment he felt the crushing weight of the loss as if it were his own. Inside the haze of unconsciousness, Ava stirred. Her body lay still, but in her mind she heard the silence where a baby's cry should have been. Her spirit screamed, reaching out for the child she would never hold. A single tear slipped from the corner of her closed eye. The surgeon shouted, "She's still bleeding. Keep pressure now." The team scrambled, the fight for her life far from over. And as the machines wailed again, Ava's body went limp, forcing the surgeon to make a brutal choice: risk everything to pull her back or lose her forever. The battle for Ava's life raged on. The surgeon's voice cut through the storm of beeping machines. "She's crashing again. We need more blood. Stat." Nurses rushed, their footsteps echoing across the sterile floor as new bags were hung, fluids pushed, compressions applied. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, slowly, the monitors began to stabilize. The jagged line on the heart monitor evened out, the frantic alarm softened, and the rhythm of life returned. "She's stabilizing," the anesthesiologist said, relief breaking through his stern tone. The surgeon exhaled, his shoulders sagging slightly. "Good. Finish closing. Let's get her to recovery." Outside the glass, Michael's chest finally rose with something like relief. His hands, clenched into fists for so long, trembled as he pressed them against the window. She had survived. Against the cruelty of the night, against the violence of her husband, against her own failing body, she had clung to life. But Michael also knew what she had lost. His eyes flickered to the small, covered bassinet in the corner of the room. No cameras, no press, no stranger would ever see what he had just witnessed, but the image was burned into him forever. Hours later, Ava was wheeled into a quiet recovery room. Machines beeped softly beside her bed, the oxygen mask still over her face. She was pale, her body frail but alive. Michael sat at her side, refusing to leave. His hand enveloped hers, his eyes never straying from her face. When Ava stirred, it was like a fragile flower trembling after a storm. Her lashes fluttered, her lips parted. She blinked, confused, her voice barely a whisper. Where am I?" Michael leaned closer, his voice soft, steady. "You're safe, Ava. You're in the hospital. They saved you." Her eyes searched his face, struggling to piece together the memories. Slowly it returned. The pool, the blood, the icy water, the pain. Fear flashed in her gaze. Her hand shot to her belly, trembling. "The baby? Where's my baby?" Michael's throat tightened. He had faced boardrooms, scandals, and billion-dollar deals without flinching, but this moment broke him. His voice cracked despite his effort to steady it. "Ava, I'm so sorry. The doctors, they couldn't." Her eyes widened, tears spilling instantly as the truth slammed into her. "No, please, no." Her cries were raw, piercing, tearing through the quiet room. She clutched her stomach as though holding on to the emptiness, shaking her head violently. "I carried them, I sang to them. They can't be gone." Michael's own eyes burned. He reached for her, pulling her gently against his chest despite the wires and tubes. "I know, Ava, I know. You didn't deserve this, none of this, but you're alive, you're still here, and I swear on everything I am, I won't let anyone hurt you again." Her sobs shook through him, her grief heavy, endless. She buried her face against him, her tears soaking into his shirt. For the first time, Ava Morgan, the woman once adored by millions, was allowed to grieve not as a star, not as a wife, but as a broken mother. And yet, in the hallway beyond the door, a shadow lingered. A figure watching, waiting, eyes burning with fury at the sight of Michael holding Ava. Because David Miller had not disappeared, and he was already planning his next move. While Ava lay in the hospital, clinging to the fragile thread of survival, David Miller was escorted into a holding room at the downtown police station. His once perfect suit was torn, his tie hanging loose around his neck, his hair matted with sweat. He looked less like the polished businessman the world admired and more like a desperate animal, cornered. The officers left him with nothing but a metal chair and a table. Cameras blinked from the corners of the ceiling, recording every twitch of his jaw, every flare of his nostrils. He slammed his fists on the table, veins bulging in his neck. "This is a mistake," he bellowed. "Do you know who I am? I'm David Miller. I built half this city." But no one came to listen. No one cared. His phone had been confiscated, but even if he had it, the calls wouldn't have saved him. Already, the headlines were spreading across every news outlet. David Miller forces pregnant wife into near-death spectacle. Clips of the night flooded social media, showing his cold commands, his violent outbursts, and finally, his attempted attack on Ava as the paramedics tried to save her. The world that once praised him now spat his name with disgust. Investors began pulling out. Contracts collapsed. Lawsuits piled at his door. Every bridge he had built with charm and manipulation burned in an instant. The empire he had sacrificed love and dignity for was crumbling before his eyes. And worst of all, Sophia Lee had vanished. The woman who whispered power into his ear, who had fueled his ego and helped him orchestrate Ava's humiliation, was gone. Reporters claimed she had been spotted boarding a private jet the morning after the scandal. By evening, she had issued a statement to the press, painting herself as an innocent bystander. "I was only there to support Ava," she said with false tears. "I never knew David planned something so cruel." David threw a chair against the wall when he saw the report. His voice cracked with rage. "Liar! She was mine. She promised me." But no one was listening anymore. Sophia had abandoned him, erasing her connection to his downfall. Meanwhile, Ava's image was rising again. Photos of her being carried out by Michael spread like wildfire, captioned with words of sympathy and outrage. She deserved better. She was always our star. Hashtags trended worldwide. Justice for Ava, stand with Ava. The world that had once forgotten her was rallying behind her now, lifting her from the ashes of humiliation. David sat in the interrogation room, his chest heaving, his world collapsing. He clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing with venom. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. "She thinks she can run to him? She thinks she can rise again? No, I'll destroy them both. If I go down, I'll take them with me." The officers returned, sliding papers across the table, charges of assault, endangerment, and attempted harm. David barely looked at them. His mind was already elsewhere, spinning with vengeance, clinging to the only thing he had left: rage. And as the officers led him to a holding cell, David whispered to himself with chilling certainty, "She'll never be free of me." The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of machines. Soft light filtered through the blinds, casting gentle stripes across Ava Morgan's frail figure. She lay propped against pillows, her face pale, her body weak, yet her eyes, though swollen from tears, held a quiet resilience. She had survived the unthinkable. But survival came at a cost. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, the emptiness there cutting deeper than any wound. Tears welled again as she remembered the silence where a baby's cry should have been. The grief was heavy, suffocating, a weight she didn't know if she could ever escape. Michael Anderson sat beside her, his large frame almost too big for the delicate chair. His usually composed face was shadowed with exhaustion, his tie loosened, his suit still wrinkled from the chaos of the night before. But his hand never left hers. He had been there since she opened her eyes, steady, unshakable. "Ava," he said softly, leaning closer. His voice, though low, carried a firmness that wrapped around her like armor. "I know nothing I say will take away the pain. I know this loss feels unbearable, but hear me when I say this. You are not alone anymore. You will never be alone again." Ava turned her head toward him, her lips trembling. "I lost my baby, Michael. I lost everything that mattered." Michael's grip tightened gently around her hand. "No, you didn't lose everything. You still have yourself. And I promise you, you still have me. From this day forward, no one will ever touch you, no one will ever control you, no one will ever hurt you again. I'll make sure of it." His words struck something deep inside her. For so long, Ava had lived under David's shadow, her worth tied to his control, her voice silenced. Now, for the first time, someone was offering her not possession, not pity, but protection and choice. Tears streamed down her face, not just of grief, but of fragile hope. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" Michael's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through his powerful exterior. "Because I've cared for years, Ava. Long before this nightmare. I watched you shine when the world adored you. I watched you fall when no one caught you. And I swore to myself that if I ever had the chance, I would be the one to stand by you. Not because you're a star, not because you're a symbol, but because you're you." Ava's chest ached, a different kind of ache this time. She couldn't speak, but her eyes held his, and in that silence something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, a bond, a flicker of light in the darkness. Michael leaned forward, his voice dropping to a vow. "David will never lay a hand on you again. I'll use everything I have, my power, my name, my fortune, to keep you safe. That's my promise to you." For the first time since the tragedy, Ava felt a fragile sense of safety. But just beyond the walls of that hospital, danger still loomed. Because while Michael vowed to protect her, David Miller was already plotting his revenge. David Miller sat in the dim confines of his holding cell, the stench of sweat and concrete clinging to the air. Gone were the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Now, his empire of illusions had shrunk to 4 gray walls and a metal cot. But his rage kept him alive. He replayed the humiliation in his mind. The cameras, the whispers, the police dragging him out of his mansion like a criminal. Michael Anderson holding Ava in his arms, the crowd cheering for her instead of him. And worst of all, the betrayal of Sophia, slipping away at the first sign of ruin. His jaw clenched until pain shot through his skull. "They think they've beaten me," he muttered to himself, "but they have no idea who I am." Even in disgrace, David still had connections. Wealthy men who owed him favors, corrupt hands he had once fed. He knew the system. He knew how to exploit cracks in the law. And above all, he knew how to wait. Within days, his lawyers arrived, polished and persuasive. They filed motions, twisted narratives, painted him as a victim of stress and misunderstanding. Money spoke loudly in the shadows, and soon the strict charges that should have buried him began to thin. Bail was granted. David walked out of the courthouse, cameras flashing like gunfire. His smile was forced, but his eyes told the truth. He was not broken. He was dangerous. Reporters shouted questions. "David, what about Ava? Do you regret what happened?" He ignored them all, sliding into the back seat of a black car that whisked him away. Inside, his phone buzzed with messages, investors cutting ties, properties freezing, lawsuits piling. His empire was crumbling fast. But beneath the wreckage, his obsession remained unshaken. Late that night, David sat alone in a rented apartment, the glow of a single lamp illuminating stacks of news clippings about Ava and Michael. Headlines praised her resilience, celebrated Michael's heroism, and condemned David's cruelty. Every word was a blade to his pride. He poured whiskey into a glass, his hands trembling with fury. "She thinks she's free of me. She thinks he can replace me." He slammed the glass against the wall, shards scattering across the floor. His reflection in the cracked mirror looked back at him, eyes wild, face twisted with hate. "If I can't have her," he whispered, "then no one will. Not even Anderson." He began to plan. Calls were made to old contacts, men who dealt in silence, favors, and shadows. He paid them with the last of his liquid funds, promising more once his empire was rebuilt. The plan was reckless, but so was David now. He didn't care about reputation anymore. He wanted revenge. In his twisted mind, Ava wasn't a victim. She was a traitor. She had embarrassed him, destroyed his image, and turned the world against him. And Michael? Michael had stolen everything he believed was his. David leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile creeping onto his face as the first details of his plan took shape. He whispered to the empty room, "This isn't over, Ava. You're still mine, and I'll come for you both when you least expect it." And as he lit a cigarette, a shadowy figure on the other end of the phone replied coldly, "Just tell us when. We'll handle the rest." The morning sun streamed through the hospital blinds, casting a golden glow on Ava's face. She sat up slowly in her bed, her body still weak but her spirit quietly rebuilding. Grief weighed heavily in her chest, yet each breath reminded her she was alive, and that survival itself was a form of defiance. Michael Anderson stood near the window, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice clipped and sharp. "I want round-the-clock security outside this room. No exceptions. I don't care how much it costs, triple their salary if needed. No one gets near her without my approval." He ended the call and turned back to Ava. His eyes softened as they landed on her fragile figure. "You're safe now," he told her, his voice gentler. "I'll make sure of it." Ava gave him a faint, weary smile. "Safe feels like a word that doesn't exist anymore," she whispered. "David won't stop. I know him. He can't accept losing." Michael moved closer, pulling a chair to her side. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his deep voice steady. "Then, let him come. He doesn't understand. This time, he won't be facing a frightened woman alone. He'll be facing me." The determination in his tone sent a strange warmth through Ava. For years she had been told she was weak, powerless, a shadow of her former self. Now, here sat a man who spoke not of possession, but of protection, not of control, but of partnership. Later that day, Michael made arrangements to move her into one of his private estates once she was discharged, a secluded property surrounded by high walls, advanced security systems, and loyal staff he trusted with his life. He spared no expense. Helicopters were placed on standby. Cars were armored. Guards were vetted. Every precaution was taken. When Ava expressed concern, Michael gently brushed it aside. "This isn't just about security," he said. "It's about giving you peace. You've lived too long in fear. That ends now." But Ava's heart remained heavy. She had seen the fire in David's eyes, the obsession that consumed him. "Michael," she whispered one evening, her hand trembling in his, "he won't stop until one of us is gone. I don't want you dragged into this because of me." Michael met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Ava, listen to me. I've faced hostile takeovers, betrayal, and men who would kill for less than what David wants. But none of that scared me. What scares me is the thought of losing you. I'm already in this. By choice, I'll protect you, no matter what it costs." Her eyes glistened with tears, a mix of sorrow and fragile hope. She didn't answer with words, only squeezed his hand tightly, silently accepting the shield he was offering. For a moment, it seemed as though safety had returned, that Michael's power could truly keep David at bay. But miles away in the shadows of Los Angeles, David's plan was already unfolding. And as Ava finally drifted into a fragile sleep, a black car pulled up outside the hospital. Inside it, a man watched her window with cold, calculating eyes. Night fell over Los Angeles, cloaking the hospital in shadows. The streets outside were quieter now, but not empty. A black sedan idled across the road, its tinted windows hiding the figures inside. Two men sat in silence, their faces rough, their eyes cold. They weren't strangers to violence. Tonight, their orders were clear. Watch, wait, and strike when the moment was right. Inside Ava's room, the atmosphere was softer. She lay resting, her breathing steady, her frail body recovering from the trauma. Michael sat nearby, flipping through documents on his tablet, but never straying far from her side. Security guards stationed themselves outside the door, their presence a silent reassurance. Yet Michael's instincts told him peace was temporary. He had lived long enough to know the difference between quiet and safety. This was not safety. This was the calm before another storm. The men in the sedan adjusted their radio, static filling the car. One leaned forward muttering, "We move soon. The boss wants her scared, real scared." The other smirked, loading a weapon with deliberate slowness. "Scared won't be enough, he wants her broken." Back inside, Ava stirred, her dreams restless. Images of the pool, the blood, the lifeless silence of her baby haunted her. She jolted awake, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. Michael leaned forward immediately, concern etched on his face. "You're safe," he whispered, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "No one can hurt you now." But outside, danger was already moving. The hired men stepped from the sedan, their dark coats blending with the night. They crossed the street with purposeful strides, avoiding the front entrance. Instead, they circled the building, their eyes scanning for weaknesses. One of them spotted a side door propped open slightly by a careless worker on a smoke break. He grinned. "There's our way in." Security inside remained unaware. Guards patrolled the main hall, cameras scanned corridors, but the side entrance was blind. The men slipped in, silent as shadows, their boots barely making a sound against the sterile floors. In Ava's room, she tried to calm her racing heart. Michael noticed the unease in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. Ava shook her head, her voice faint. "It's just, I feel like he's still here, like he's watching me." Michael's jaw tightened. He didn't dismiss her fears. He had the same gnawing sense. He stood, walked to the window, and glanced out at the dark street. The sedan was gone, but the unease in his chest only deepened. Then, down the hall, a faint noise echoed. A door creaked. A shadow moved. The guards outside Ava's room turned their heads sharply, hands moving to their weapons. The two intruders pressed closer, their eyes gleaming with malicious intent. One pulled out a syringe, the liquid inside glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Quiet job," he whispered. "She won't even scream." Inside the room, Ava gripped Michael's hand, her voice trembling. "Something's wrong. I know it." And just as Michael opened the door to check the hallway, a masked man lunged from the shadows, knife flashing in the dim light. The masked man lunged with the knife, the blade glinting under the harsh hospital light. Michael reacted instantly. His instincts, sharpened from years of high-stakes business battles and private security training, took over. He grabbed the attacker's wrist mid-swing, twisting it sharply until the knife clattered to the floor. The man let out a grunt of pain, but Michael didn't let go. He shoved him hard against the wall, the impact shaking the doorframe. Ava screamed, her frail body trembling in the bed. The monitors beside her spiked, alarms shrieking in the chaos. "Michael!" she cried, her voice breaking. The second intruder appeared from the shadows, syringe in hand. He rushed forward, aiming straight for Ava. Michael spun, blocking him with his shoulder, forcing the syringe to stab harmlessly into the attacker's own arm. The man cursed, his body jerking as the drug entered his system. Security guards finally burst into the corridor, guns drawn, but the fight was already violent and chaotic. Michael threw a punch so hard it sent the first intruder sprawling onto the floor. The man scrambled to his feet, blood dripping from his lip, eyes blazing with hate. "You don't know who you're messing with," he snarled. Michael's jaw tightened, his voice low and dangerous. "No, you don't." The man lunged again, this time pulling a small pistol from his jacket. Gasps erupted from nurses and patients further down the hall as he aimed directly at Ava's bed. Without hesitation, Michael launched himself forward. The gun went off with a deafening crack, the bullet shattering a monitor near Ava's head. Sparks flew, glass shards scattering across the room. Ava screamed again, covering her face with trembling hands. Michael tackled the gunman, slamming him to the ground. They wrestled violently, the gun skidding across the floor. Security guards shouted commands, but no one dared fire, afraid of hitting Michael or Ava. The second intruder, sluggish from the syringe's effects, tried to rise. His vision blurred, but his loyalty to David's orders pushed him forward. He stumbled toward Ava's bed, reaching for her with trembling fingers. "No!" Ava cried, her voice hoarse with fear. Michael, seeing the movement out of the corner of his eye, delivered a brutal elbow strike to the gunman beneath him, knocking him unconscious. Then he launched himself at the second attacker, grabbing him by the collar and throwing him back so hard the man slammed against the metal bed frame, collapsing in a heap. Silence followed for a moment, just the sound of Ava's sobs and the steady beeping of machines. Both attackers lay motionless on the floor, one unconscious, the other slipping into a drugged haze. Security rushed in, cuffing the intruders, shouting into radios for backup. Nurses hurried to Ava, checking her vitals, calming her trembling body. Michael stood in the middle of it all, chest heaving, fists still clenched, his protective rage not yet cooled. He looked at Ava, her tear-streaked face staring at him with both terror and gratitude. Then one of the guards pulled a phone from the unconscious man's pocket. The screen was still lit up, showing the name of the caller. And when Michael saw the name David Miller glowing on the screen, his blood ran cold. Proof that Ava's nightmare was far from over. At dawn, news of the hospital attack spread like wildfire. Reporters swarmed the streets, flashing headlines across every channel. "Assassins target Ava Morgan." Photos of Michael shielding her circulated online, fueling outrage. The world condemned David Miller, though he had not yet been officially tied to the attack. But those who knew him didn't need proof. His fingerprints were all over the chaos. Inside his hidden apartment, David paced like a caged animal. The failed hit enraged him, his veins bulging as he threw a glass against the wall. "Idiots!" he roared. 2 men against Anderson? I should have sent an army. His empire had collapsed, his name was ruined. Sophia had abandoned him, yet his obsession remained unbroken. In his twisted mind, Ava wasn't a victim, she was the thief who had stolen his power, and Michael was the rival who had taken his place. David lit another cigarette, his hands shaking. He dialed a number, his voice low and venomous. "It's time for the last move," he told the man on the other end. "If I can't destroy her in silence, I'll destroy her in fire." Both of them, together. Meanwhile, at Michael's estate, Ava was finally discharged from the hospital and brought to the fortress-like mansion. The gates were tall, cameras lined the walls, and guards patrolled the grounds. Still, Ava's heart raced as the car drove her inside. Safety had become a fragile illusion. Michael walked beside her as she entered the grand foyer, his arms steady at her back. "This place is secure," he assured her. "No one can touch you here." Ava looked up at him, her voice faint. "David won't stop until one of us is gone." Michael met her gaze with fierce resolve. Then it will be him. That night, Ava sat on the balcony overlooking the gardens, wrapped in a shawl, her thoughts heavy. The grief of her lost child weighed on her, but for the first time she felt the possibility of healing. Michael joined her, bringing warm tea, his presence grounding her. "You've been through hell," he said quietly. But Ava, I see your strength. I've always seen it. When the world turned away, I knew you'd rise again. Her eyes welled with tears, not of sorrow this time, but of something gentler. She whispered, "You make me believe I can." But even as a fragile sense of peace grew between them, danger was already closing in. David's final plan was in motion. A van idled just miles from the estate, its back loaded with explosives. The driver, a loyal remnant of David's past circle, checked the timer strapped to the device. His instructions were clear: breach the gates, plant the explosives, and level the mansion. No survivors. Back inside, Michael's phone buzzed. A warning from one of his men. Unidentified vehicle circling the estate. Suspicious activity. Michael's eyes narrowed. He stood, scanning the darkness beyond the balcony. Something felt wrong. Too quiet, too heavy. He turned back to Ava, his jaw set. "Stay inside, lock the doors." And as he strode toward the control room, the first explosion echoed in the distance, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The ground shook violently as the first explosion thundered across the estate. Windows rattled, alarms blared, and Ava gasped as she clutched the balcony railing, her heart pounding in terror. "Michael," she cried, fear tearing through her voice. Inside the control room, Michael Anderson barked orders into his radio. "Lock down now. Evacuate staff. Secure Ava." His men scrambled to action, sealing off doors and activating reinforced barriers around the mansion. Cameras flickered, showing the van breaching the outer gate, smoke curling into the night sky. David Miller watched from a distance, hidden in another car. His eyes glistened with manic triumph as he muttered to himself, "If I can't have her, no one will. Tonight ends it all." But Michael wasn't a man who bowed to fear. He stormed back to Ava, pulling her into his arms. "We're getting out," he said firmly. "Trust me." The estate trembled again as another blast rocked the gardens. Guards exchanged fire with the masked intruders spilling from the van. Chaos erupted outside, but inside, Michael kept Ava shielded, guiding her through hidden passages known only to him. They emerged into a reinforced safe room beneath the mansion, walls of steel surrounding them. Michael's men joined them, sealing the doors. "She's secure," one guard confirmed. Michael nodded, but his jaw remained tight. This doesn't end until David is finished. Above ground, sirens wailed as police and SWAT closed in. The firefight intensified, explosions lighting the night sky. But the tide turned quickly. Outnumbered and outgunned, David's hired men began to fall. The van, loaded with explosives, was disabled before it could reach the main mansion. The plan unraveled before David's eyes. Rage consumed him. In a reckless frenzy, he charged out of his hiding place, screaming Ava's name. "Ava, you're mine! You'll never escape me!" His voice was raw, echoing through the smoke. Police tackled him to the ground, his body thrashing, spitting curses. Cameras from helicopters above captured everything, the once respected businessman reduced to a raving monster. Handcuffs clamped around his wrists as officers read him his rights. For the world watching, this was his final downfall. For Ava, it was the release she had prayed for. Hours later, silence returned. The fires were extinguished, the intruders arrested, and David hauled away in chains. In the safe room, Michael finally exhaled. He turned to Ava, brushing soot from her cheek. "It's over," he whispered. "You're free now." Ava's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't only of grief. They were of relief, of hope, of rebirth. She leaned into him, her voice trembling. "Free? I never thought I'd feel that again." Months passed, and healing began. David was sentenced to decades behind bars, his empire seized, his name forever disgraced. Sophia vanished into obscurity, forgotten. Ava, however, rose again. With Michael by her side, she returned to music, not as a product, not as a possession, but as her own voice. Her songs carried the weight of her scars, but also the light of her survival. And when she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, her tears fell onto their tiny faces, tears of joy this time. Michael held her close, their children cradled between them. A family born not of power or control, but of love and resilience. For Ava Morgan, the nightmare was over, and a new life, bright, free, and unbreakable, had finally begun. So that's how Ava's story closes for now. And if you're still here with me at this very moment, my dear friends, then I know something in this journey has touched your heart. Maybe it's the pain she carried, maybe it's the strength she found, or maybe it's a reminder that no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind. not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And that's the truth Ava lived. If this story moved you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope today, and don't forget to subscribe, because together we can turn pain into healing and scars into strength.